Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about this very powerful, emotional, important book which I just finished reading before I have to return it to the library. The Radium Girls, The Dark Story of America's Shining Women by Kate Moore, whom I found out in the various back matter pieces like the afterword and the author's note and such. She's actually British, but she directed a play about these radium girls, and that's obviously what got her interested in the story. So she traveled to the US to trawl through archives and talk to these women's like surviving relatives and friends and all sorts of stuff like that to produce this very powerful book. There had been previous books written about the radium girls, but she was kind of disappointed. Of course, they told the story and such, but they didn't really focus on the personal lives of these women, what made them tick, like bringing them out as individuals. It was more about the overwhelming tragedy and it was totally effed up how the people running the corporations, they constantly like appealed and appealed and appealed. How dare you think radium was causing health problems? They just didn't want to admit their wrongdoing at all. And in Ottawa, Illinois, one of the cities where the Radium Corporation was based, even the regular townspeople turned on the women who were saying this really ruined our health, like we're having miscarriages, I'm unable to work or even leave my house anymore, I can't do housework, my whole life is like in the toilet, and how dare you slander our precious small business that is helping the community. Small towns, they turn ugly in a moment if you get out of step with the crowd. But anyway, that's kind of an off topic thing. And I know a lot of people might think girls, not just think, they know it's kind of like beyond like old fashioned, kind of like patronizing way to refer to grown women. But when most of them began working for these various like radium corporations, they actually were girls. Like many of them were not even 18 years old. Some of them were as young as 13 or 14 when they started working. This was an era when, I'm not sure off the top of my head about the laws. I know you can get like working papers at 14, the last I had heard, but like back in those days, you only needed an eighth grade education to start working at a lot of places. Many elementary schools were K through 8 or 1 through 8. They like junior high didn't exist in many places. High school was still a fairly new concept. Many people didn't go to high school because like why would you need to go to like high school when you can just get a job and start working, like earning your money and working towards a good career as soon as you're like 14 years old? Why bother with extra education? And most people didn't go to college either, so they were literal like teenage girls when they started working. And that just makes the tragedy even worse and more horrific because like they didn't know anything. They were naive, they were innocent, they believed what their bosses and the powers that be in the media were telling them. Oh, this is totally safe, you can like put the brush in your mouth. And I will be doing a little bit of a demo, obviously not with radium of course, but just the way how they like painted with a very fine brush. I think even my finest brush, with which is like a number 0 brush, like their brushes were even finer, maybe like 30 hairs in total in the brush. And like some of the smallest watches which they were painting, they painted radium on the dials of small watches for military men to take during World War I. And then later on other like watches that glowed in the dark, like so these were like 3.5 centimeters across. The tiniest elements of the watches were like only 1 millimeter. This is an 18 gauge post for like wearing in piercings. This is like 1 millimeter in diameter. My nostrils are pierced at 18 gauge. None of my ear piercings are even 18 gauge. Like most of them are 16 gauge, except for my rooks, which are like the bars up at the top of my ears. Those are 14 gauge, and my ears are currently 5/8 of an inch or 16 millimeters. Although I can fit 17 millimeters in them now, but I'm holding back because I want to stay at this size for a while. So anyway, like you can imagine how freaking tiny it was to paint with something this like tiny, like infinitesimal. And I'll obviously be showing the demo. And just this is one of my found pens, the Concord custom nib LeBoeuf George Washington. This is a 0.2 millimeters, so you can imagine something that's even tinier than that really fine work they were doing with their painting. So like serious, and I'll do the demo later. So anyway, this tells us the story of these girls, and this was really good money at the time. I do like how after every like monetary thing she puts in the book, like, $50 or 1,000 or whatever, like, $10, she puts in parentheses the correction for inflation in the modern era to get an idea of how much money that was worth. And they would earn 1.5 cents per watch. So that gave them incentive to, like paint them up quickly and quickly and quickly, as many as possible. Sometimes they even frequently they would take their lunch to their workstation, with, of course, like even more radium contamination, and so they could like continue working while they were having lunch, or just like finish lunch within like 5 minutes, just like gulp it down, gouge themselves, and then get back to working, because they're paid by the piece, not by the hour. And they could earn a lot of money, like $200 a year in modern money. Yeah, took home $20 a week. $370 in modern money. And the fastest in the top earners earned an annual salary of $2,080, almost $40,000 in the modern era. So money definitely went a lot further. Obviously, like the inflation in the economy, that's a whole convoluted thing for another topic. And the first it wasn't even called a factory, it was called a studio. So that made all these girls feel so highfalutin. Oh, I'm a real artist, I'm painting, I'm working in a studio. This was in Newark, back when Newark was not what people think of it today. I'm aware it's been recovering. I'm not sure like how much recovered it is, but it's definitely not like its nadir of like tragic urban decay in the late 60s, like 70s, 80s, 90s and stuff. This was like a really like good place to live. Like people, it was like a metropolis. Sorry, I'm fumbling for words. It was like, this was a desirable place to live. Beautiful houses, nice neighborhoods, parks, like good schools, like libraries, like businesses, like a walkable 15-minute city with good like public transportation. And then later on, they moved to Orange, New Jersey, because they felt, oh, maybe people are complaining, or we need more space for our like factory. And later they had to move again from Orange because, oh, people are complaining, we're ruining the air is making them feel sick, or their laundry turned green because of the local fumes, or their like pets are dying, or their like the well in their water made like someone like vomit, or just something like that. And so they moved to Orange, and finally, when the people of Orange were realizing this is bad, they moved on to Ottawa, Illinois, and like made a whole new crop of girls sick. And they were also working in Connecticut, but that's not really mentioned so much in the book. And she mentions later on they didn't learn anything. Oh, surprise, surprise. In the 1978, a whole new crop of women got sick from radium, even though they had seemed to have learned their lesson. I guess they forgot it, like a few decades of silence. Oh, we're not taking precautions, and oh, these women are getting breast cancer. But we knew about this like 50 years ago. Like, why did we repeat this all over again? And so like she gives a cast of characters at the beginning, which is like helpful. So like some of the dial painters are like Helen Quinlan, Jenny Stalker, May Canfield, who is the instructor. The old-fashioned word instructress is used. The Maggia sisters, Amelia, called Molly, and her sister Albina Maggia. And then there was Quinta and so many others. Let me see, Quinta Maggia McDonald. And she's in alphabetical order. Some of them got married and changed their last names, like Hazel Vincent Kuser, Grace Fryer, Catherine Schaub, and like a lot of these women were cousins and sisters in the radium corporations, and the doctors and the investigators. There was some really shocking revelations. Like, for example, one of the doctors who had been treating these women and giving official like reports to the public and the people investigating, he turned out he wasn't a doctor at all. He was practicing medicine without a license. That's like really freaking creepy. And of course, this was they were making all these women go for regular, sometimes even weekly medical, very like invasive medical tests in both New Jersey and in Illinois. And this was the era when it was like very, very hard to find a female doctor for just about anything. So they're like forcing these like women and underage girls to like have very like personal medical examinations by men, which like that just makes me so sad for all these like generations of women who had no choice but to see male doctors, because like female doctors unfortunately just like didn't exist even for the most like personal of like procedures. They might probably would have preferred a woman to like see them for. And then we see like the dial painters in Ottawa, Catherine Wolfe Donahue, Charlotte Nevins Purcell. She later had to get one of her arms amputated, like clear up to the the Elbow, Frances Glatzinski, O'Connell, Helen Munch, Mary Ellen, Ella Cruz, Pearl Payne, who lived until she was 98. Not all of them like succumbed young, although many of them did unfortunately die young. And the people like running the Radium Dial company and the doctors from that whole new set, it's just so difficult to read about this. Like, I mean, at the time they were touting radium as, oh, this is the modern wonder drug, even though people knew about the like dangers and potential risks of radium. Oh, we're putting it in everything. It's a wonder drug. We're going to put it in lotion and like water and like spa treatments with radium. And you're going to get blasted full on with radium to look youthful, and putting in your shampoo and in your soap and in like soda pop and whatever else you're doing with your body, or like put it into like your clothing, or just about everything you can imagine they put radium in. Although you know how snake oil charlatans are, like it's suspected many of these things, particularly the cheaper ones, they didn't really have any radium, or they barely had any like noticeable thing. They just said, oh, it has radium to make a quick buck and swindle, like people who easily fall for like woo woo, like alternative medicine garbage. So seriously, they got sick because it was called lip dip paint. So some of the people working there, the head honchos, they were horrified to see the women and girls doing this. They said, don't do that, it'll make you sick. But they brushed it off. Oh, but our instructress and the president, they told us it's totally normal and we should always do this because it'll waste too much precious radium paint if we're just like washing it off with water, like, brushing it off with like paper or something to get the excess off. We just to put, like, they would put it in their mouths. Like, I'm not sure like how far exactly, like seems like they were putting it all the way back in towards their tongue. I'm obviously not going to do that and runk up my paintbrush, but like serious. And so they were like constantly ingesting radium throughout the day. And some of them worked there for like years, and the ones that worked there for less time, they got less sick. Some didn't get sick at all. It was just basically the luck of the draw. But like the more you put your paintbrush in your mouth, and it was like coming in contact with your teeth, and the radium seemed to attract itself to like bones and teeth, and the dentist couldn't understand. I'm pulling their teeth out and it's not helping anything. They're just like open abscesses and sores, and more teeth are like turning rotten, and like the jawbone is like literally like falling out. They just like started to do a tooth exam, and like suddenly all of a sudden the jawbone cracked off in one piece, and the dentist lifts it out and there's no pain at all. It's like, when doing a root canal, when the root is already dead, so you don't need Novocaine, you don't feel pain. Obviously that doesn't work. I know from personal experience, like don't assume there's no feeling just because like one of the roots in the tooth was already dead. But thankfully they did shoot me up with Novocaine after they realized like that the root in the other tooth was not dead. And so anyway, they just, so many horrible things. Like they would, like their hips were getting locked in place. One of these women, she had like a stillbirth, and then she had a miscarriage, and the doctors like convinced her to have an abortion with her third pregnancy because they felt it would be yet another like miscarriage or stillbirth. And some of the women like never like conceived even at all, not even like getting towards like the point where they could have stillbirth or miscarriage. They just like never conceived it in all their years of marriage. Other women they had to get like sterilized because they felt, oh, you're gonna like mess up your children, or this is just gonna like ruin your life or whatever. You just like yeet it all. I know the doctors were a lot more aggressive about taking out the whole uterus back in the day, although unfortunately I don't think people have learned that much in medicine. Off topic rant. And like some of them, they couldn't like walk, they had to be in wheelchairs, like they could barely move their hands, they couldn't like write, they had to like stay in their houses, they had to be like carried in chairs to go to the courthouse, just like so many like awful things. And they had to like retire to like homes. Like this was back before they really had a concept of like, social welfare and taking care of the needy. It was like, oh, charity, that's something shameful, or pull yourself up by the bootstraps even when you haven't any boots, or someone is standing on your boots. And and they were bankrupted. A lot of them, they had to like mortgage their houses to the hilt, and they like had to like go into serious debt because like these doctors' bills just kept coming and coming and coming, and there was no known solution or treatment, and they needed the best doctors, even though even those doctors, the good ones, couldn't help so much. And going to the best doctors meant they had to travel into New York City or Chicago, and that the travel was an expense plus staying by a hotel, and then seeing the doctor and then doing that all over and over again, just horrible things. And some of the women who like had children who did not die of stillbirth or miscarriage, they were like kind of like deformed or like malformed, or they were sickly their entire lives, or they were told don't have any more children because you don't know what like horrors are waiting for them. And like the one woman, Charlotte, she had her left arm amputated. Presumably in that era, she was like right-handed, because you know how they like shamed and bullied lefties out of their natural inclination. So even if she had been originally left-handed, she was presumably like forced to be right-handed anyway. So, but obviously losing an entire arm, like, which even if it's not your dominant arm, that's just a horrible, horrible thing to like happen. And they had hobbling about, they were like crippled, and the dental problems, and the company meanwhile were covering it up. Oh, they died of syphilis or diphtheria, and like that made people talk, oh, she must have been slutting it up. Oh, syphilis, that's a disease for whores, and like ruining their reputation. And them even after death, like when they exhumed some of these women, like the graves were glowing inside, or the old jawbones taken out of women, they were like leaving like a white substance on the x-ray film they were absent-mindedly sitting on top of in the doctor's or the dentist's desk drawer. And when they like took out the bones for autopsies, like horrible things, they saw all the radium that were there, they like burned them to examine the ashes. And meanwhile the companies just kept saying, we didn't do this. This wasn't our fault. Like, they got sick for a different reason. Or maybe radium is bad, Ed. I will grant you that, but we didn't know at the time, so we can't be blamed for, like, doing something we didn't know about. Or they were saying, oh, the statute of limitations has expired, or, like, that particular sickness isn't covered under, like, workers' like compensation or something we would be held liable for in, like, our health reimbursement plan. I mean, I know workers' rights at the time, like particularly for like health related like injuries and such, they were not what they were today because there was like a lot of little knowledge. But that's just like total like CYA mode. They just could not admit wrongdoing, and they were taken to court, and like they said, oh, we're going to appeal everything, we're going to do an objection to everything the lawyer says, and oh, we're going to appeal and appeal and appeal and go all the way to the Supreme Court because we're not guilty. We just can't be guilty. It's just so sad to like see what was happening to these women, and they were like abused because of like capitalist greed, and they were even like keeping their medical tests from them. That was also an era when many doctors, like even without like the whole radium angle, they wouldn't tell patients, oh, by the way, Mrs. Jones, you have cancer, and I think you might have like a year or 6 months, whatever, left to live. They just would like say, oh, you're fine, Mrs. Jones, or like totally make up something else that's not like necessarily a lethal condition, because oh, why would you want to scare your patients unnecessarily? Like, don't tell them anything about their medical results, don't explain what you're doing when you're examining the patients, like act annoyed when they ask any questions about what you're doing or their condition. It's just like, so many doctors have a God complex even today. It's just like really, really, effed up. And there's like, nice pictures. This is a radium-induced sarcoma. This is, I don't really do like, content warnings and trigger warnings at all, but these are kind of some, not like hugely graphic pictures, but they are, like a little bit disturbing if you're squeamish about that. So this is like a radium-induced cancer of the knee, and the jawbone on the pictures over there, you can see like that's really awful. And they kept denying that these women were getting sick because of radium. It's just like really, really sad. And like some of them were dying before they could even like get married. Their fiancés had been childhood sweethearts with, or they died early on in the marriage, leaving the husband and the children. And of course, by that time, the husband was practically in the poorhouse because he had to go into debt and bankruptcy and mortgage, or sometimes the fathers were the ones holding the bag because these women were too ill to even like go on dates with anyone. And at the beginning they had, oh, this is fun, we're not going to even just necessarily use the radium to paint the watches, we're going to like, oh, paint our teeth and paint our mouths and paint our faces because we glow in the dark when we walk. And when they would, like undress for some of the, like, the medical tests, or they would like brush them off, like they were glowing even when the lights were out. So it would like cling to every item of their clothing, and like no wonder they got sick. They just thought it was like fun putting the brush in their mouth like over and over and over again. And it's horrible. I know, can't say enough about it. Just I'm just totally lost for words. These people like obviously saw like illustrations, demonstrations of these women were very sick. Like what else could it have been but radium? But they just didn't want to like admit any wrong doing it all, even when these women got like horrible. And like one of these like husbands, I just opened up to this page, like James McDonald, he was turned out to be an abusive a-hole. He started like abusing his wife. Like you can't blame that. Oh, I was stressed because of the money situation and because she's ill. Like when Quinta, one night in September 1928, his resentment had come to a head. When Quinta refused his demands for money, James had viciously struck his crippled wife and threatened to gas her to death, turning on every gas jet in the house as she lay helpless in her plaster casts. He was arrested. Quinta, however, did not press charges. It was not the first time she'd been hit. She did begin divorce proceedings with Barry's help. That's the lawyer who was like very like liberal and radical and fought for them. He had 4 daughters of his own and a wife, so he kind of like was more sympathetic to women than the average man of the era. But it seems James later won her round, and they were eventually dropped. My husband tries to be brave, she'd said of him once, but it's harder on men than women. I'm lost for words. It's no excuse. Like, wife beating is wrong. I'm so sad for this woman who had to go through, like, being beaten by her husband and, like, threatened with, like, death, like, on top of her horrible, terrible, like, health problems. And the radium people, they tried to buy off others, or they didn't even want to like reimburse the people in the towns who were like getting sick, or their clothing on the laundry lines was being ruined, or there's like reading group guides. And I was kind of like surprised towards the end, like she kind of like, like cognitive dissonance, like I'll understand one thing is bad but not like in other things. She's talking about the people, oh yeah, the atomic energy, like the atomic age, plutonium, it's the future in the 1950s. And they were like realized because of the Radium Girls sacrifice, all these people might be hurt, they'll have to take safety precautions like that. But unfortunately, like nuclear arms race and such like that began to deposit in human bones strontium 90. This was talking about when they were like testing the mushroom clouds, the nuclear, the atomic bombs, and dismissing the concerns. Oh, they're very small. If we fall, terrible future we might face if we fell behind in our nuclear defense effort. Oh, perish the thought we won't have bombs and bombs and bombs. Like bombs are the way, like atomic bombs for the win. Just like totally, effed up. And like talking about the Manhattan Project and Glenn Seaborg, a chemist. As I was making the rounds of the laboratory rooms this morning, I was suddenly struck by a disturbing vision of the workers in the radium dial painting industry. Atomic bomb making involved widespread use of radioactive plutonium, and he realized at once that similar hazards faced those working on the project. Seaborg insisted that research be undertaken into plutonium. It was found to be biomedically very similar to radium, meaning it would settle into the bones of anyone exposed to it, like no shocker. The Manhattan Project issued non-negotiable safety guidelines to its workers, based directly on the radium safety standards. Seaborg was determined that the women's ghosts would not be joined by those of his colleagues who were working to win the war. And they talked about, like, the whole, like, not stereo, like POV, like, oh, we had to drop the bombs. Like, I was kind of shocked she would, like, go along with that, knowing, as she did from all the research and personal connection with the women, like, this is terrible. Like, we did not have to drop the bombs, but obviously that's a whole thing for another topic. An official of the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission wrote, if it hadn't been for those dial painters, the Manhattan Project's management could have reasonably rejected the extreme precautions that were urged on it, and thousands of workers might well have been, and might still be, in great danger. The women had been, officials said, invaluable, but meanwhile, screw the hibakusha, the Japanese atomic bomb survivors and casualties who got very sick with radiation poisoning and various cancers and just horrible, horrible things. You can check out my video I did on the book called Nagasaki Life After Nuclear War if you want like more details on like why I think why we shouldn't have dropped the bombs at all. They were like an illegal, unethical, immoral war crime. So obviously like check that video out. But I'm just shocked she would like totally not even mention the horrible effects of like atomic poisoning on the victims of these bombs. That was just like WTF, like an absolutely, huge oversight. I guess I'm not going to do the demonstration with the painting, but it was like, so tiny. If you can imagine a brush that's even finer than this, it looks like it's looking bigger on camera than it actually is, but this is like really, really tiny. And they would, like dip it into like a radium, which glowed in the dark. This is like a greeny kind of ink, and they would just like paint like tiny little things. Like I don't even think this brush is fine enough to do something that's a millimeter in length. Like maybe if obviously that's not like ideal to paint with like something like this, but that's like, can you imagine like 1 millimeter in width on something that's a watch that's only like 3.5 centimeters across? That's just like, that requires like really fine tuned effort, and they would like totally hear it from the bosses and the instructors and the president and such if they like went outside of the line. So you really had to be good, and they felt at the time, oh, this is great, I'm earning big bucks, most women don't get this, I'm gonna spend it on wonderful nice clothing, and maybe I can like go to college eventually someday. And they would buy nice fur coats and corsets back when like before people were told, oh, women didn't like corsets, they were crushing ribs and displacing organs. Actual women, like, why would we have worn corsets for centuries if they were such death traps? That was all like Victorian men talking smack about corsets, and it just became like a popular misconception that just won't die. I hate that urban legend so much. But anyway, they bought all these like nice like clothes and perfume and just lovely things with their money, and they realized, oh, it wasn't worth it. And in the end, we all went into debt and were bankrupt and had to spend all of our money on doctors and our families and our fiancés and boyfriends and husbands and such. They were hurt. They had to shoulder all this extra burden. This job was like way more expensive. It totally wasn't worth it. And like it seems like the world still hasn't learned its lesson because we still have nuclear bombs lurking out there somewhere. I am like a pacifist, but like for reasons like similar to the Quakers, I'm not like an anti-military, and I believe some wars are morally justified. But anyway, obviously that's totally off topic, but again, I really enjoyed this book, and I would highly recommend it to you guys. I will be hopefully back soon with another bookish video. I did take a bit of a break to focus on NaNoWriMo, probably against my own better judgment to do it. It was not a particularly good nano for me, particularly in all the freaking scandals, and I'm doing Inkvent swatching videos every day in December as well, so look forward to that if you guys are into that. Thank you guys again very much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.